the great people will come from this milieu that we're in. Like, great people that you can't foresee, but they will be people that were ready. And so if that's you, if you feel like you have something important to accomplish in this life, if you feel passionate about a project, you feel like things are going in the wrong direction, you have a clear vision of what would be better, what would be right, be ready, right? Make that your goal. If you're not ready, even if you have, your vision is correct, even if you would be a good man for the job later down the road, if you're not ready, it will pass you by.
This is not a business where you take polls. It's a business where you think. You're not right or wrong because 1,000 people agree with
you. Restart again. Thanks for coming on Lafayette Lee. We're so glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you are a prolific writer and anonymous Twitter account, Twitter poster. And part of what we were really excited to have you on is because all the guys here at the office are really big fans of your writing and your Twitter presence. And in large part, I think because you do a great job of straddling the line between realism, looking at the world, particularly our current times in all of their ugliness and the challenges that we're facing, but also not devolve. So you look at that realistically, you look at the world realistically, but you don't devolve into doom posting, nihilism, black pilling. You seem to straddle this line between objective reality and then always encouraging men to be bold, to be courageous, to fight. What are you trying to accomplish, just broadly speaking, with the Lafayette Lee project or persona?
I try my best to always regroup. So I have a lot of intellectual interests. I enjoy talking about politics, about religion, family, things that are near and dear to me. But if I have one thing that if any of my writing can accomplish, it would be to help other people, especially men, but I try to be accessible to everyone, but to try to help people to take on the burdens of their obligations, to really seize the things that are in front of them, to tend their gardens, to make the most use of the tools that are, lying right about them, so that they can rise up and that they can live good, healthy, bold lives. I think that this is a challenging time. I mean, but every era is challenging in its own ways. I don't like to see people kind of retreat from the battlefield, to retire, or to find themselves into these loops of addiction and despair, where they're taken out of they're taken off the table. They leave the chessboard. And I think there's a lot of that today. I think there's a big temptation for that. So, if I can help other people, because it's an ongoing project in my own life, if I can help other people in any way to re-engage, to lay hold of their lives again, to make the most of it, I really believe great things can happen from ordinary people. And so that's always been my focus, no matter how eclectic it gets. Or I love talking about things like, this week I've been talking about anti-communism and larger historical trends, but ultimately it always comes back to the individual within their family and within their community. And those things to me matter most.
What made you want to start the Lafayette Lee project, as it were? I've listened to some of your podcast interviews before, but I don't think I've at least personally heard this portion of your story. It's a time investment, and obviously it's yielded good returns for you. You're involved in IM 1776, and you recently reviewed Chris Rufo's book, and you had a Twitter space with those guys. Like it's led you to good places, as it does if you plot at something faithfully. But what caused you to kind of get interested in launching this project on both Twitter and Substack?
Well, I find myself in the same position that many of you do, where I feel like we live in a very stifling, we live in a culture that is that is very suffocating in some ways. There's maybe like an anti-culture, like an anti-cultural force that I feel it's just a major burden to me. I don't like it, and I also feel like we're dealing with serious problems that are upending our day-to-day lives. Not just these are the things that that most got me engaged in the beginning were these sweeping macro level problems that were impacting my daily life, and seeing that it was so difficult to even talk about things that were truthful, talk about things that are meaningful and real, to even talk about some of the problems that all of us were encountering, whether it was the height of the pandemic or, we're dealing with what was happening, with our country basically engaging in like a proxy war, things like this. Like these things all impact us in different ways. For me, both of those events impacted me in a very personal way. And so not feeling like I had much of an ability to even speak about these things anywhere else, I kind of found myself over here in Twitter. And, like most people, I probably had like a handful of followers for a very long time. I don't know if I had anything really important to say at the time, but I wanted to be able to speak about what I was seeing and what I was interpreting. And so the Lafayette Lee name is just, one of my forebears was, the patriarch of the Lee family that came over here in like 1605. So that's always been kind of like a important part of my family history. But then like Lafayette's always been a personal hero of mine in my family as well. I have children who like reading about him. So I just kind of mashed the names together on a whim. I just went with it. And so there was no like big planning.
What about the handle?
Oh, I don't know. That one probably was also on a whim. I mean, it was just me just jumping on here and realizing that this was just going to be my outlet, right? I had no ambitions beyond just being able to speak my mind and be able to kind of report on what I was seeing happening. And really a big part of it too is not even just me speaking, but being associated with people that I found interesting and engaging, people that had answers to questions that I had that I didn't feel like had an institutional answer, right? And so it was all on a whim. I feel like I got carried away in like a wave. It wasn't me making any real plans or having a strategy or anything.
Yeah. When did you start writing? Was it during COVID?
Well, I've always been kind of a writer, not like a capital W writer, but like, in the privacy of my home and my thoughts, is that I've always been a person who writes in a journal. I've done that since I was young. And I used to write a lot of, I really enjoy family history and things like that, and regional history. And so I've always been intrigued by that. I always wrote things about that. I wrote short stories on my own time for a while. It's just always been a enjoyable creative outlet for me. And so Twitter, even though it was a little difficult to get used, I'm pretty verbose. And so it's like trying to be able to distill everything into a short, impactful tweet was a challenge for me. But I've always kind of had a little bit of an interest in writing. And so it kind of married, conversation. I love conversation. So kind of married conversation with writing. And I've just started doing it, started a Substack. And it just kind of took off from there. And so, I can't say that I consider, when I've been asked, when I've made submissions to IM 1776 or Moonshine and Magnolias, it's always like, well, what do you want us to call you? And I am embarrassed to say like I'm a writer. So I usually try, if I can, just to say I'm just a husband and father.
No, but you do sound like the type of person who writes just naturally or by habit. You've always done it even when it wasn't published or when it wasn't out there. Do you have actually do you set yourself strict goals in terms of saying, I'm going to write this piece, I'm going to write a piece a week, I'm going to do X many tweets, or is it just an outlet of of what you're already trying to put down on the page.
What Josh means to say is he's a writer like you, and he wants to see what your secrets are.
No, I have no secrets. If you ask my wife, well, so the goal is to be very structured and rigorous with it, to put myself on a schedule. I struggle with that. I'll be honest with you, and I'm speaking as somebody who just kind of wandered into this stuff, but I am one of those people. I have a very, very hard time writing if I don't feel like it's honest, or if I don't feel like it's true to what I believe, or true to what I'm experiencing. And so I struggle with having like tight deadlines and things like that, because for me it's almost a torturous process. I'll be honest. When I'm trying to write a piece, I put myself through a great deal of abuse, and it takes a lot longer than other writers. If you ask Mark Garza from I'm 1776, on the back end of all the pieces I've written for him, it's usually been like, hey, here's our deadline, or this is when I'm going to get it to you. And then I'm the guy who always drops it in like a week after, filled with apologies. But I'm one of those people, I just cannot bear to send something that I don't feel good about, right? And it takes a long time for me to get there. And so I struggle with this. I'm one of those people too that I can't just sit down and like suddenly write. Some people are good at this and they're disciplined. I kind of have to get into a certain place in my mind and my heart. And so sometimes that requires me to drive around for an hour or so. Sometimes that requires me to take a long walk. Or, if I have that spark hit me, even if I've had pieces where, I woke up at 2 a.m. and suddenly the spark comes and I have to run over and sit down and start writing. But it's difficult. I don't know how to capture that yet, but if I could find some way to discipline it and make it a scheduled thing, I would do anything for that.
Yeah, Santiago recently introduced me to your work, and he introduced me to Twitter too. I'm new to the space, but Sans, what was the piece that you just sent me yesterday?
The Hungry Country.
Yeah, The Hungry Country was excellent. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Yeah, very much. We're both big fans of Cormac McCarthy, and could definitely feel that the strength of that influence there. I was curious to ask you about in that piece you write about your great-great-great-grandfather. And it sounds like just smack dab in the middle of like the American West. What time was that, and what was the setting of his life?
So this would have been, that piece covers, it would have been the late 1800s. That was about the time that he was, the region that he was in, there were, they weren't states, they were just territories at that time. My family has these roots in the South and the West. And so there's this, in my family history, you go across, there's a lot of movement between these two regions. And to me, it's always knit together in a very, it's a story of America to me. And there's a lot, everybody wants to define America and talk about what that means. And, I love any attempt to articulate what this America thing is. I'm interested in, but for me, it's really the stories of those people. And he's one of those figures that the family piece, knowing that you have blood that runs deep in the place, in a region, it makes these places so magical to me. And so, reading his experiences and then being able to have the opportunity to write about that, because it has such an enormous impact on me and my family. My grandparents, I grew up at the foot of my grandparents, always telling these stories to me. So it was very real. It's always been real. I find myself as a father telling my children these same stories. So as this has become such the oral tradition is just very prominent in my family, I just felt like this would be an opportunity for me to put this in writing and kind of take it out to the world. Because I always get these messages from people, and they almost can't believe that I have all these family stories, because I always that seems to be the thing I write about the most. But every family has these things. And some families don't really do well at preserving memory. I think that's very important to try to preserve that. So one of the reasons why I wanted to write it is because I wanted to preserve it, not only for my family, but for the greater American consciousness in a way, I guess.
Yeah, how does I was really struck by that piece. It's a phenomenal piece. We'll make sure to link it in the show notes so people can read it. But it seemed to connect, just as you were describing, with a lot of the writing, a lot of the work that you do, that I've seen you write about on Twitter, talking about people having to, the importance of being connected to your ancestors and to the heritage that you come from and to a particular place, and how a lot of the issues and the ills that we see today are a result of people being sort of unpeopled, unmoored from, or unrooted from where they came from and their past. How has it shaped you to be able to have like direct written access to the thoughts of your ancestors in ways that most people these days just don't? Like, in so many ways, so many people these days, the closest thing they have to like a record by their ancestor is their grandparents' Facebook posts. But you have diaries and diaries and diaries.
No, that's a good question. I think it's had a big impact on me. And from when I was very young, I mean, I experienced the family loss at a young age, and so grew up very much with relatives and my grandparents. And so I don't know if it was generational, like a generational difference where the people that raised me, who were much older, they came from a very different era, when they were hungry growing up, and they were really, it was a hard scrabble upbringing. And, all of my grandparents come from this, that having those stories, having access to this writing, I don't know why on both sides of my family, we have these things. And sometimes it just might be that some families have them, but your grandmother, your great aunt, or whoever it is outside of your immediate family has a box full of this stuff. And then when she passes, it disappears. I mean, this happens a lot to families. Somehow I've been able to come into the, possession of these things, whether, copies of the original, some things are original. But it's as my life, like everybody else's, as I feel more upended and unpeopled, I find that those writings become almost scripture. I don't want to be blasphemous here, but I do, I really do believe in that verse about the hearts of the fathers turning to their children and so on. I feel like those things are crucial for us to retain a sense of who we are in this time when we're being pulled apart, and really having the guidance of your ancestors, whether it's remembering them, or it's being able to read their own words. These are very important things. And I hope that if anything that I write encourages people to do something good with their lives, I really hope it's this, is that even if you do not have the words of your forefathers, you need to preserve your words, and you need to preserve your legacy for those who will come later. I get messages a lot by people that are saddened that they don't have these things in their lives, or they don't know who their grandparents are, and that this is more common than I think many of us would like to believe. But my advice there is, we all, at one time or another, we all come from a wanderer, and you might have to be that person. But you need, if you're a man, become the patriarch of your family line. If you're a woman, become the matriarch, and preserve this memory for those who come later. It will be very important, I think, as we see how information is weaponized and it's used to strip us of our autonomy. It will be very important to have a sense of rootedness in the past, and this is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you see what you're saying is awesome. It makes me think of the Israelites leaving Egypt, and God gives them, amongst the many commands and structuring of reality that occurs right after that period in the Exodus and Deuteronomy. A big part of, there's a lot of emphasis put on by the Lord on folks telling these stories to their children, and their children remembering the stories. So they know what happened, and then their children know what happened, how the Lord dealt mightily with the enemies of Israel, and how preserve his people. And there's that you can see the reason is not just to know the stories, like it's a soul shaping activity to be able to preserve these stories, structure them, and then hand them down to your kids.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen what you're talking about very starkly, just even in my own family history. Of one side of my family, my mother's side, has a very strong oral tradition, telling stories of grandparents, great-grandparents. The other side, absolutely zero. So both of my grandfathers died when I was either 1 or 3, so I never knew them. But one of my grandfathers I know through stories, and the other one I don't, frankly. And so it's interesting to see that I've just the full black and white of one side of the family, zero stories. I know I could tell you in 5 minutes everything I know. And the other side, I could tell you about my great-great-grandparents, coming from, who were farmers in Germany, and then coming to Montana, and then, westward from there. And so it is interesting. And it's interesting to see how, with those people, the virtues that I've been told about of grandfather, great-grandfather, et cetera, you kind of internalize to some extent just through hearing it.
No, yeah, that's absolutely true. We in this day and age, we find ourselves at the mercy of these really powerful technological forces that we don't even understand how they're doing, how they're working on us. And then there's also the temptation of kind of becoming a captive of abstractions and ideologies. These things really do pull us away from a sense of who we are and what our obligations are and who we belong to, and who depends on us as well. We find ourselves falling in service in a way of these things, and there aren't many of these primordial institutions left, but one of them is family. And I really do believe that. I think that this is probably our best way to survive this and survive it well is by clinging to family. And that includes, the family we have here, but that also includes people who are long dead. And I think it also, in that same token, people who will come after us. I think that it's difficult to have that long, almost cyclical view of history, and to see, your own self as the continuation of so many people who have come before you, and that there hopefully will be many that will come after you. And that to me, it doesn't overwhelm me as a sense of like I'm just insignificant. I mean, of course I am in the grand scheme of things, but we all have this imperative role to play. We're crucial. We're the only ones along this long line of people that are in the here and the now. It's our turn. The sun is shining on us. And so I feel the weight of history in a good sense is that it gives us a tremendous responsibility. And we as human beings, especially men out there, we do best when we understand a sense of responsibility, when we honor obligations. And I do believe we have a real obligation to those who are with us now, our families, but also those who came before.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's why your content, even if you're not writing, specifically about, let's say regime related things, seems so starkly opposed to the general cultural morass that we see today on this particular way. You talk about men do better when they respect and honor and respond to obligations, where in general, the world we live in today is one that, as Charles Haywood says, is characterized by emancipation from all unchosen bonds, right? Essentially like taking off any obligations you've not consented to use that term that's now popular, where and so that comes across in your writing to me, like especially on Twitter, where it just gets picked up in sort of your exhortations, encouragements to young men. Lee, I'm curious. So you write a lot. We talked about writing, but what do you like to read? Who influences you from a reading perspective?
I read quite a bit. I love reading physical books, but I also spend a lot of time listening. So I have a pretty eclectic taste, with books and music, but I would say that what I enjoy reading probably the most is I love literature. I really, it just, to me, narrative is just such a powerful force in our personal lives, and we don't really, I think, appreciate that. And literature just, to me, is very much like balm to the soul. Obviously, I really have a great appreciation for the King James Bible. That is, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, but this is where I learned to love language itself, and I thankfully had a family that we read the King James Bible every day in the morning together. And so this was like one of those, to me, I love the King James biblical language. To me, it's not only instructive and spiritually uplifting, but it's beautiful. And so those are things I love, and I'm trying. I don't succeed at this as I need to, but I try to do that in my own family with my own children. So there is a lot of reading in that as well. But I think something I do love that I haven't mentioned before, but is really enjoyable to me, is I love children's books. And so my family and my wife and I spend a lot of time reading children's books with my children. And so I enjoy that probably more than anything else, is the experience of being able to read to my children and to discuss what we're reading, in a way, like while you're reading, and there's just something very satisfying about reading a book to a child and being almost enveloped in this other place with a child you care about, with your son or daughter. And so, yeah, children's books, those are one of my favorite things to read. And it also gives me a chance to read aloud. And so I enjoy that.
Yeah. Any particular series that have been favorites of your family?
Well, my children love Watership Down. We've read that half a dozen times together. They also like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. That's been a big one in our family. We read The Once and Future King together, and that was good. Rudyard Kipling is a big one in the family. We've kind of went on like a Rudyard Kipling hangover for a while because that was all we were reading for about like a year. But the kids love that, and those are probably my favorite. I try to, they don't, and not that I have anything against newer books. It's just there's so many classics out there that, and I feel like the language, we always try to read books that are just slightly above their level. So they have to reach a little bit, they have to ask, or sometimes, it's just, they don't actually know what the word means, but when it fits into a story, into a narrative, the mind has a way of being able to understand what those words are. And so like, I'll catch my kids sometimes using these words that I know they only got from like an old book, because there's nobody uses this language in like day-to-day conversation. Yes. So that's also a treat. It's probably like I'm setting them up for failure here because they're going to be mocked and ridiculed by their peers. But it's like, it's really funny when I listen to these kids using words that, nobody uses in day-to-day language anymore.
Yeah, 100%. My son's been enjoying Rikki Tikki. I forget the last two words of that book. Yeah, Rikki Tikki. Your Kipling. It's a great, and to your point, like it's just the part of it is the language is so good. We also reading through Narnia with him right now, and also a bunch of the Peter Rabbit, the original Peter Rabbit little short stories. And again, the language is you're struck by how good the language is, and it's not. Like the stories are simple and whimsical and whatnot, but the language is really good, and the structure of the sentences and the words they choose, the the books are great. Not dumbed down, not silly, not anything like that. Lee, are you familiar with, you mentioned the King James Bible. Are you familiar with, have you read Christopher Hitchens' piece on the King James on, I think it's on Vice, or not Vice, on Salon?
No, I've had it recommended to me, but I have never actually read that.
It's an old piece. Okay. Yeah. You should absolutely read it. I'll send it to you afterward, but it's I mean, he was, notoriously was not a Christian, but this is a long defense, really good long defense on why the King James Bible and its importance for language should be preserved. It's
yeah, I'd love to read that.
So Lee, did you do a lot of part of your background? I've heard you talk about this before. Is military background. Did your ancestors were they also in the military? Is this why you joined, or why did you join?
Yeah, I do come from a long line of there's a long military tradition in my family. It was always something that I was made aware of and that we talked about, all the way from before the United States was the United States, militias and so on, in the colonial times, all the way down to the present. And so it was something I was always very proud of. I had a relative that was on the Bataan Death March. I have some other individuals that distinguished themselves in World War II and even earlier. And so those stories were always very real, and they always shared. And it was, in my family at least, it was the military. It was funny. I never really noticed this until I went to college and met a lot of people that didn't see it this way. But in my family, if you were in the military, it was a very honorable thing to do. You did it for patriotic reasons. And then as I got older, I realized that there is definitely a perception that if you join the military today, that you're just, hard up for some cash, or, you have nothing to do, or you have a low IQ, or whatever it is. I never really didn't grow up learning about that at all. It was always very driven home to me that it was it was an honorable thing to do, and it was a responsibility of anybody who lived in this country. And for me, joining, I joined at a time when 9/11 was still very real. The war on terror was ongoing. And part of me was, I felt like this was my responsibility, but I also, I feel a real sense that there are other Americans out there that are, whether or not, what the conflicts that we're involved in, whether or not those are, for the reasons we as the public believe, I kind of always felt this kinship with those who were out there doing the heavy lifting. And I kind of felt like less of a man, just letting somebody else go and offer the lump, the pound of flesh. So to me, I felt a kind of a sense of shame as I had peers and people that I knew who had already joined, and I kind of felt like I didn't have a good excuse. And so, I jumped right in. I enlisted, even though I could have gone in as an officer. I chose to enlist, and got a very good education in the military. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the world. I saw a lot of the world, but I also developed a deeper love and appreciation for other Americans, for American people. And I think it deepened my patriotism. For some people, I definitely, there was like a sense of feeling a little jaded, but overwhelmingly for me, it actually deepened my love and appreciation for the place I live and for the people that go and do these kinds of things. American people, in my opinion, whether these wars are misguided, which I would say overwhelmingly they are, American people are an exceptional people, and they deserve the very best. And so I consider it, and it was something I'm proud of the fact I was able to have that experience. I don't feel like I did anything, spectacular or great or necessarily heroic, but I'm very proud of that because I felt like it was, I felt like I followed through on what I felt was the right thing to do, even whether or not it was, but I did feel like that. And I surrounded myself with people I think are some of the best of my generation. I'm very grateful for that experience.
Yeah. It feels like, or I think it's true, that 9/11 or directly post 9/11 was the last time in living memory where there was that feeling of everyone who can should go join up. Like everyone should go defend America and be part of, like, we're going to hit them back. And however that looks, everyone who can should go join up. Obviously Santiago and I were far too young at that point to jump in, but, today, and I don't know how much of this is just being online and seeing kind of the worst of things, but the recruitment videos are very grim in terms of it being just ideology and benefits and just like sort of social issues, very far removed from that spirit of joining up to be a part of defending your country or the camaraderie of that. Do you think, I'm just curious to hear your take on the military as it stands right now. Is that a long-term terminal decay? Do you think this is a dip? What's your perspective on it as an institution at this point?
Well, so I say this as somebody who is deeply concerned with the good people that are in there. And there are many good people in the military. Online, it's very easy to it's easy to take these things into like these abstract places where they're stripped of people and character and things like that. These institutions are very impersonal, and nobody knows that better than somebody in the military. But there are good, honorable, courageous, exceptional people that are in the military now, even with all these changes. And that's actually why I'm most concerned is I don't think that the military is going in a good direction. And to be honest with you, it hasn't been going in a good direction for a very long time. I also critique the woke agenda in the military and trying to bring more diversity, equity, and inclusion and all that, and the transgender, treatment and so on in the military. All of these things are signs of decay and rot. But there was decay and rot to begin with there. And I think that was made abundantly clear in the exit from Afghanistan. That is what I think should capture people's attention. I don't think you should ignore these woke reforms that the administration is doing now, but the rot preceded that, right? Iraq is a good example of this. This is a deeper rot. It's the role that our military plays and the disconnect from what the American people believe it to be. Most people, so let's be honest, most people join the military. Yes, there are benefits and things like that. There's a substantial population of people that join the military for that. But I came in during the global war on terror, so I can say that most people joined the military that I knew for various reasons that included a sense of adventure, wanting to go and fight, really. I was in combat arms for most of my career. And so it was very much a young man's desire to go out and prove himself and fight. People might not like that, but that's just a fact. That's what compels young men from all over the country to go and put their lives on the line, is this sense of adventure, this sense of wanting to go fight, to prove themselves. And then on top of that, there's always a sense of patriotism. And that's kind of taken a heavy beating lately, but I mean, that's real. I saw that all over. It doesn't necessarily explain why everyone joins. It's not the sole reason, but it is a powerful force. It's something it's the reason why recruiting offices were swamped after 9/11 in many parts of the country today that people would say are not patriotic, So these things are real. And when people like that, who are willing to go out and put their lives on the line and to do the hard work, to do things that no other job does this, right? It's dangerous when you start turning this into a political project, and it's been a political project for a very long time. The people that joined and were under much different, their reasons were much different than maybe the desires and the agenda of those in policymaking positions, right, or the administration. What people thought they were fighting for and what we were actually fighting for are two different things. And I think that our country, I think that the U.S. government has gone way too long in pushing these kinds of conflicts and being willing to enter into conflict like this, assuming that the rank and file, the people in heartland America, are going to continue to buy into the agenda. This is all patriotism. I think that 9/11 and the atmosphere that created, I think that was an anomaly. I don't think we're going to get something like that again. I worry with the amount of damage that this political class has done to patriotism in this country. I really worry that even if we were to be attacked by a truly belligerent enemy, I don't know what the response would be like. We don't seem to prioritize the kind of virtues that would compel somebody to go put their lives on the line for their homes and their families. We are very atomized now, and that's only been accelerated by this kind of endless war cycle. And so I worry about that. I do think that we're on bad footing, but I think the rot is deeper than woke. I think we really need to think about that. I think if we ever get a changing of the guard in Washington, D.C., if we ever get a chance to have a soft regime change in this country where this political class is ousted from power and a new, more patriotic group comes in, this has to be addressed. No nation can survive on this. And just because we've been really enjoying living, in a world defined by U.S. hegemony, well, those days are over now. And I think the disruption that we've seen in institutions across the board that Christopher Rufo writes about, one of the worst places that this is happening is in the military. And it will have disastrous consequences for regular people if it doesn't get addressed.
On that note, I was listening to your appearance on the Alex Kashuta podcast, which was a good conversation. And I think you touched on this briefly there, but I was curious to hear more of, I think you see history as cyclical and have seen the cycles taking place over time. From that perspective, where do you see our current situation with the regime? And do you think that there's a good chance for a positive shift, a positive cycle change? Are we continuing in a worse direction?
Well, I do think I will caveat what I'm saying with, I do think there are many positive things on the horizon, and I think we can't lose sight of those things. Not because we just to keep a stiff upper lip and look forward and assume that things are always going to get better, but I'm saying more that I do see positive things on the horizon. I see a lot of positive trends. And I think it's important to remember those things as we deal with the dysfunction and disorder that kind of that is just all around us and has been all around us and will probably be a problem for years to come. And I think we have to understand that is very much that's very probable that we're going to deal with a lot of dysfunction for a very, very long time. That said, I think that I think that America has. I think America's not necessary. We say the American nation. It's not really a nation in the traditional sense, and I'm not saying that to denigrate America, but it is a country made up of many nations, and it always has been, and it always will be. It's too big, and it's too. I hate using the word diverse. I don't know what other word to use here, but I'm using that in maybe an older sense. It is too big. It is too, like we used to call this sectionalism, that there are these communities and nations within this country that really define America in different ways for everyone. And I think that will still holds true today. Where I see positive things coming from is I see positive things coming from a local level. Notice you see a lot of insanity and madness, from the national media and from, Twitter or other places like that. It's hard not to look away, and I don't think people should necessarily. But notice how many people that are truly mad you run into on a day-to-day basis. There will be some. And some people have to unfortunately run into those kind of people on a day-to-day basis more than others. But I'll tell you, in my own personal life, I don't really encounter people like quite as crazy as this. It doesn't mean, that's not to say that this madness doesn't affect all of us, that it doesn't affect policy and things like that. But what I am saying is that there's a deeper bench in this country than people realize. And just because it is suppressed doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I see good, positive, wholesome things coming from these local and regional places and from individuals and families and communities that are scattered across the country. This has always been where American dynamism comes from. And one of the reasons why we've been so powerful, why we have such our economy, there's just nothing like it. As bad as things are, I don't think we can comprehend the sheer greatness that we've inherited in this place. But it's because it's been able to marshal this dynamism from all these disparate corners of this continent. It's because there's so much here. And so I see positive things happening on a more localized localized level. And some of the clumsiness that we're seeing up in Washington is actually a blessing for us. We need some top cover. It is good when the eye does not fixate on us, when it can't, right? When it's focused on these nonsense things that really are above and beyond our experience as individuals, that gives us breathing room to be creative and to work hard and to forge deeper connections with one another. And that's where our project should be. So I don't, as far as the regime goes, I think that our elites are in a bad place. I don't think that things are good. Yes, they're craven and they're terrible. There's a great deal of incompetence at play. We have not made major strides since the very end of World War II in certain areas. We have really stalled out in certain ways, and it's become very difficult. We're now entering a multipolar world. I mean, these things, globalization as we knew it, in my opinion, is dead. We still have globalization, but it's not what it used to be. It can't sustain the political class, these elites, the way that it did in the past. These are all pressures and challenges that they are going to have to deal with, and that they're starting to wake up to. What that says to me, though, is that we're going to continue to go through major upheavals and changes economically, politically, and so on. What we need to do is we need to stay rooted and we need to stay focused, especially on the here and now at the local level. This should be our focus. And this is where I think we're going to make the most ground. This is where good things are going to come up that can have a big impact on the aggregate. And so that I see, that's always been the power of this place. That's always been baked in the cake. So whatever happens, I don't think that this political class can continue to do things the way they've been doing it. I think they're going to have to be more tyrannical than they've been. I do think there's going to be a stronger effort to totalize other parts of, aspects of American society in ways that have never been tried before, but they don't have the capital to do so. And it's draining from them. And so the question is like, when things change, when opportunities arise, Chris Rufo's identified these opportunities and institutions. The question is, are you ready for those? Are you ready when the time comes, when you get the breathing room, when your adversary has vacated the field? Are you ready to take it? And that's the question that we should always be asking ourselves. If we're not ready, then we're doing something wrong. And so being ready in a position where you can seize the initiative is crucial for all of us. And it all starts at that local level.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, an example comes to mind from your own story, your piece, the Hungry Country, where you're grandfather needs to find flour because they need to eat. And part of the story revolves around him knowing the different guys in the community and being able to go speak to them and ask for credit, and credit is not given, and then going back and interacting with different people by name in a community that's trust-based, where they do life together. That then results in positive outcomes. That's so sorely lacking today. So many people, again, live sort of unmoored lives, particularly in connecting it back to the military. Lee, I'm curious about your thoughts here. It seems to me, I wasn't in the military, but my father-in-law and other people in my family were, and a big reason why they cite joining the military is this sense of, just you mentioned adventure, but also the looking for brotherhood, and something that seems sorely lacking these days at a local level is places where men can congregate together, where they can develop brotherhood. How do you see this kind of playing into that localism thesis?
Well, I think this is my big concern, is that I agree with you, and it's very important. It's important for us individually being healthy and being happy and so on, but it's crucial for the problems that we see that need to be solved. Power is going to always exchange hands between a very committed minority of elite types. That's just how it is. And we have to have a counter elite. I would love to see a counter elite locally in your local area, a rooted, good, effective, competent counter elite locally and the state level, nationally, right? This is what we want to see. We want to see a sea change because we are in a state of decay, and we're seeing that at every level. So that's important, but you can't do that if you don't have those strong connections to other people, that are like you. I think it's very important to be a good member of your community, and that requires, fulfilling obligations to people that you don't necessarily agree with on a political level at times, but being a member of a community it's a good thing. It's like being a member of a family too. I don't take care of my children because they give me something in return, or because I can sit down and we have the same take on Cold War history or something. There's something beyond that. And it's very important to us in our development that we have that, right? So we have to honor those things. We have to be part of that. That's part of being a human being in the world, right, that we live in. So that's important. But when it comes to these other things, when it comes to capturing this purpose that we have to make things better for ourselves and better for those around us, you need to be around like-minded people that have that sense of mission and purpose. And I think it's important right now because we are atomized, we're deracinated, we've been disconnected from the past, we've been disconnected from even the places that we live in, from the people we live around. We have got to rekindle that. If we don't rekindle that, if we don't have ways and avenues to connect with people that have a similar vision, that have similar beliefs and values, we're just going to continually be at the other end of the trough, waiting for somebody else to take the torch. And we won't have the same kind of ability to shape our own destiny. And I think that's very important to recommit to that. So I love the online space because it gives me a chance to connect with people that are like-minded on a broad basis. But I think the next step has to be that this needs to return to a local place. This needs to return to the real living, breathing world. So what we do up in the ether up here and this abstract cloud that we all kind of float around in needs to have a real life connection at some point. That's the next step, right? And so to me, if, on a political basis, we need a counter elite. That's what we need. We need a good, viable counter elite that reflects the things we care about, that has our interests at heart. We can't ever get that if we don't help foster the conditions to create that. And that I'm not just talking about coming into Washington, a new changing of the guard alone. I'm talking about in your own town and your state, the places that you live, the real ground that you need to protect. And so we got to foster those conditions. We have to cultivate them, and it's going to take some more time.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see that kind of lack of place in DC, from that perspective, it's like you can see that sort of soullessness. There was a clip of Mitt Romney, I think this week, of him saying like, "Oh, hot dogs! I sure do love hot dogs. I love hot dogs in America." And it's just this caricature of what they think or what he thinks America broadly is, versus any being rooted in any specific place or people or group or region. How do you think about those concentric circles in terms of, like for me growing up in the Pacific Northwest, it was obviously like family. And then there was an identity around the neighborhood or suburb that we were growing up in and everyone was a part of. And there was a larger identity around being in the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast, and then at the national level. But like you mentioned earlier, like as a region and people of a region in the Pacific Northwest, our characteristics were so much different from Appalachia or the Northeast or Florida or anywhere else where, talking to one of those people would feel like I was from a different country. How do you think about that in your context? How those lines fall?
No, great question. I look at this as when you're around your people, and it can be many things. I mean, this region is crucial, right? I mean, where are your people at? Where are these relationships that are this web of relationships that you have? Like, where is that based? And we have. I don't even really like the term identity. I think it's deeper than that. But you have your people. You have people that speak your language, that get you, that you have almost a spiritual connection to. And this is most pronounced regionally. We tend to understand and identify with people that we've grown up around, people that reflect characteristics that are these are things that are unspoken and unthought of. The things that you do, like a good example of this, we always use this like catch-all of culture, but it's like, if I'm going to go to the store, I'm going to line up as the British say, like in a queue, I'm going to queue up, waiting. But like I've traveled to many different countries where that doesn't happen at all. Now, if somebody were to just bombard the cashier, or step in front of somebody else to get what they want, I mean, that's actually accepted in some places. That would, here, that is not. People would consider that incredibly rude. Nobody has to really these are things that we don't notice them until they change. We don't notice them until there's an absence of them, right? They're unspoken. They're things that, like, as a father, they're things that I have to think of because I actually have to remind my children to have manners. These are things I have to teach them. But it's always a trial and error. It's them making a mistake. It's not something that, every morning I'm like, okay, here's 5 manners that we practice. It's like, hey, you didn't return the shopping cart. We do that here, and these are like silly little examples. But what I'm trying to say is that there's this invisible world of habits and customs that we all engage in all the time. When you're around your people, there are things that you do, a language you speak, that you understand each other, even if these people are different religiously or politically. There's something, that a root there that matters. Where I'm going with this is that there are these concentric circles, and you really, first and foremost, I think it's important for you to be amongst those who understand you, that you understand them. And I think it's important. I think we have obligations to these places that we come from. And I think there's a big move for people. I know that New Founding's big on this. I've heard many people talk about, go and find yourself around people that are a lot, have your values. I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. But I do think there's something to even be said of like the places that you come from, even if they've been taken over by madness. There's something about those places that if you really stop and think about it, these are your people. I mean, this is your place. This is where maybe your family roots have been for a very long time. There's something almost invisible and spiritual about it, but it's there. It is real. And I think that if we're in a position to do so, Not everybody can do this. There are some places I highly recommend people leaving. But if you're in a place, even if you're besieged in some ways, I think you need to fight for that ground. Because in a way, like, you have certain qualities and characteristics, you understand a language that is exclusive to that place. And amongst those type of people, you have a history together. And I'm a big believer in, returning to this idea is you don't need to have the mass on your side. You don't need to have a majority. Having 51% of people agree with you does not mean anything in this day and age. And I hope conservatives and people on the right can understand that. A small, dedicated, motivated group of people can do big things. A small, motivated group has done all the big things in the past. From my military experience, I was in the special operations community. I don't look down on anybody else's service, but I learned this time and again, that a small, motivated group of people can do the work of an army. And this is something that I think we can practice in our daily lives. You don't need the whole town to agree with you. You might need 10 motivated people that are on the same wavelength as you, and you really can move mountains. And so I think if we on the right had more of that perspective, that we don't need to capture the mass all the time. It's good. It's great when the mass starts to go our direction. It's great when the herd starts to pay attention to things that we know are important. But if you want to make a major difference in the world around you, you don't need to have a whole company size element of people that agree with you. Sometimes it just takes a handful of very motivated, driven people with character, group of people. And so I think that those concentric circles we're talking about, they are a lot smaller and tighter than people realize, but they matter.
Lee, are there particular, this is separate from the stories of your ancestors, your forefathers, are there particular stories in American history or even global history, but American history in particular, that you think are helpful at rekindling some of this in particularly on men? I think what you're describing is men, guys thinking we need a whole army, we need a whole institution to move a mountain. Seems there are a lot of reasons why that happens. And how do you what stories or what events can you point guys to look back at and say, no, look, a small minority, a motivated, well-equipped group of men achieved outsized returns or gains?
I think there's countless examples in American history, maybe eras, like time periods to focus on. Early American history are just replete with examples of this. And you can go from, the founding and settling of some of these places that were it was wilderness. And there were, I don't think people realize, but there were tribes of hostile tribes all around these small settlements of settlers, right? Of colonists. And it was a bloody ordeal. You look at I'm really interested in the old Southwest, right? But you look at look into the history of what Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia and some of these places, what that process looked like. Look at the Creek War. These are completely unexamined by a lot of historians, much less the general public. But when we were small boys, you might have heard of Davy Crockett, been interested, but that time period is very interesting to look at, in the early American history when, the frontier was being settled and explored, things that people like Daniel Boone were doing, Lewis and Clark, small dedicated group of people that did incredible things, changed the course of history. There's no really my friend Braxton McCoy has been, he's kind of like an amateur expert on this stuff. I know that he's written about this, but that journey of Lewis and Clark, the vision, the vision of a united continent, that changed the world. There's nothing. There's hardly anything. Almost everything else. Maybe the creation of the atomic bomb, but there are a few things that can measure up to what they accomplished. Small, dedicated group of people. You even look at Texas becoming a republic and then becoming a state, small dedicated groups of people. That's the history of America. It's not the mass. It's not democracy achieving all these things. That's kind of a modern fiction that we all latch onto. The founding of the United States, the country itself. This again, the first acts of rebellion, official acts of rebellion, were small groups of landowners in different in different colonies, creating series of resolutions and resolves in opposition to the crown. I mean, it all starts there. It did not start with a mass movement. And so for those of us on the right, we feel outnumbered, we feel like we're in a corner. But sometimes if you just take a little stroll through an old history book and try to pay attention to the numerical majority, and you won't find it when it comes to these major changes. It all begins with a small, dedicated group. And so I think we can gain a lot of inspiration from that. And I think the best place to look is probably in the early years, maybe before the creation of the United States, but also in those early decades. Just over and over again, that's what you see. I mean, that's baked into the cake in this country. That's running through our blood.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is what you mentioned democracy. This is what I was hinting at earlier when I said there's a lot of reasons why men are basically psyoped into thinking that they need a majority to be able to achieve great things. This is not an American anecdote, but you and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, where somebody analyzed all of Napoleon's battles, something like 150 battles, and he won, I think, 101, and then 49 of those he lost. And they were running various models on statistical models to see kind of what leads to different outcomes and when does he win and when does he lose. And he only loses, it turns out, anytime that the enemy force is about 80 or 90% larger than his own force. So even when he's winning, he is he's the small army on the field, and it jives with what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I love that example. I think Napoleon's fascinating. I'm obviously I'm very American centric, but I have a lot of admiration for Napoleon, and I think that if you study his life as well, you see, his life and how he was able, the whole famous quote about him finding the crown in the gutter and all that. I mean, people have to keep in mind that there's a lot of this really doom. It's gloomy prophecy, something happens, it's over, there were many of those times, and that came and went in leading up to having a figure like Napoleon rise to power. And again, he was returning back to being ready. He was ready at that right time. And his supporters and those around him were on the same page. When the moment came, they were ready. And so it behooves all of us to always be ready and to be connected to people that if you feel passionate, if you know that if there's a mission in life that you feel if there's something important or crucial to you, and it's important enough for you to take time out of your normal obligations to achieve. I mean, if you have other people that are like that with you, get started on that. Be ready. I mean, sometimes it will take 20 years, but the moment arrives and you're ready, And so I think if you're engaged in something good, and I don't think that you should ever lose track of what is most important, it's honoring those obligations that you have to the living, breathing world, right? But if you can do that and master those things, and then you can be ready, great people will come from this milieu that we're in. Great people that you can't foresee, but they will be people that were ready. And so if that's you, if you feel like you have something important to accomplish in this life, if you feel passionate about a project, you feel like things are going in the wrong direction, you have a clear vision of what would be better, what would be right, be ready, right? Make that your goal. If you're not ready, even if you have your vision is correct, even if you would be a good man for the job later down the road, if you're not ready, it will pass you by.
Yeah, absolutely. Lee, what do you, let's say, fast forward, your grandchildren are reading your diary, much like you find the diaries of your great grandparents. What do you hope they take out of that they get out of the diary, the sense of the life that you led, and kind of the projects and the legacy that you're leaving behind for them to find?
Well, I've thought about this a little bit. It's humbling to think about because, it always is a good reminder that I need to improve. I need to be a better husband and a father. I need to, it's very important to me that the things I'm doing now will somehow help those who come later. I think that if there's some kind of legacy I can pass on, I want to help cultivate the conditions necessary for my children and grandchildren to have families of their own. That's very important to me. And then to retain their faith. I think that with the changes that the transformation that we're going through as a society, there are many people that are being shaken from those, from having families and from, being God-fearing people, having that connection to a spiritual world in their lives. Like, these are being lost. So to me, those are the two most important things. I do care that I want them to believe in truth. I want them to have beauty in their lives. I want them to practice, being virtuous and having discipline. Those things are important to me. But I want those things to all lend themselves to having families and to believing in God. Those are, to me, I don't think that, no political project will be successful in pulling us out of this place that we're in without that. I don't want to see my children and grandchildren, future generations, lose that. I don't want to see them unpeopled. The most important things that I do, writing reviews and things like that, is it's enjoyable to me. And I hope it helps people have, some kind of, I hope it benefits people in some way. Ultimately, though, the things that matter most that I'm trying to do is setting my children up for having good, healthy lives, God-fearing lives. Anything that I do that misses the mark in helping my children to have those things, that's a failure. And so even if I were to have some great writing career or something, which I don't foresee, but if that was ever in the cards, but I lost that connection with my children, then my children, were still riding hopeless on the wave, that would be a major failure to me.
Would you like to write, if you could do it full time, would you like to pursue that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I could do that full time, I probably would. I enjoy it enough that I could it's something I do for fun. So to me, if you could have a job that you actually enjoy, that would be nice. So yeah, if there was ever something like that, I don't know if I have the chops for it, but definitely if that was something that I could do for a living, I would probably jump at the chance.
Yeah. McCarthy famously lived in abject poverty for most of his life. So even if you're one of the best, it's not a guaranteed way to make money.
Yeah. On that note, just real quick, I know you're a McCarthy fan. What draws you to McCarthy? You wrote you wrote sort of a memorial for him on I Am 1776. Can you just speak to McCarthy and why you enjoy him?
Yeah, it's hard to articulate that. He's been one of my favorite authors for a very long time. And I think I'll be honest. One of the things that I love about his writing is I feel, and this, I don't know anybody else who feels this way, so I could be insane. I don't know, but the struggle of his writing, the struggle against the indifference of nature, it gives me a sense of the spiritual that I just don't find in a lot of other writing. And I know that that's like contrary maybe to the popular popular belief or whatever, contrary to convention. Cormac McCarthy is very dark and nihilistic, and we're wrestling with this postmodern, all this, and that might be true. I don't know. There's something very important about wrestling with that indifference of nature, the problem of evil and sin, and never quite having the Lord's hand reach out and grab you, right? Because in those moments, that's what we want, all of us. I don't care if you don't believe in God. To me, that's what we all long for, whether we know it or not. When we're in this position, when we're in this place, when before men die, they scream out their mother's name, and they often scream out for God as well. And when I'm reading Cormac McCarthy, I feel that same struggle. And I think all of us can recognize that because we feel it in our lives at times. But to me, it speaks to the importance of, and the how important and very real it is to me, that spiritual realm as well. I feel like the place where he goes with in his writing is not been very explored. I'm not saying that he's writing, his writing is, an invitation to find God necessarily, but I feel that presence and often because of the lack of a God in those places, it helps me to kind of explore, I think, a spiritual realm that I don't in other writing. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that is very real to me in his writing. It's one of the reasons, like, I'll get in conversations with other, believing Christians, and they'll often be surprised that I like Cormac McCarthy so much. But I think that if you explore it a little bit more, he's wrestling with some really important problems and challenges that we all feel like existential. And that to me there's nothing more important to write about.
Yeah. I've always said that, Cormac McCarthy's books are set in the Old Testament, and I love the Old Testament. It's sort of, there are all the problems and the gnarly structures of people's sin, dealing with brokenness. It's a bleak landscape in many cases, but it's one that points to deeply real and truthful spiritual truths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a sense, I do wonder about, I think in that piece we mentioned, you had talked about the time of your grandfather feeling real and familiar. And there's a sense that I get in Cormac stories and in that piece of what you could call like wholesome struggle or wholesome suffering, in sense of it just feels very tangible and real, of fighting the elements, fighting the world in those sort of pioneer environments versus if you're
fighting the longhouse.
Yeah. Fighting if you're in, whatever, you're working at a SaaS company as and you got a customer service headset on, like, that's not wholesome struggle, or it doesn't feel that way. And I'm curious, I just wonder how much of that is a real element, or how much of that is us romanticizing those, the tangible struggle and kind of how that breaks down.
So I love that question. I think that this might not, I don't know if this, I'm not like a literature professor or anything. Like, I don't know anything beyond just being a reader, but this is my take on it is, when I go through the diaries of my ancestors, and when I read the words of the people that came before me who struggled and suffered so tremendously, right? Whether it was, struggling and suffering in the South, in the West, this is a land that is soaked in blood and sweat. And I think we have to remember that the people who came before us, is bleak. I don't know if we can, there's a bleakness to the world that they lived in that we can't comprehend, but there's also a bleakness in the world we live in. And that's important, because when I read the diaries of my ancestors, there is this sense of spiritual rootedness that just, I don't know how these people were able to do some of the things they did without that. And that must just be, I don't know if that's the sole reason. I like to believe it is, but I can't find, like, it's just incredible to me that as they're going through this wilderness that is so treacherous, as they're losing children at young ages, as they're experiencing sickness, illness all the time, as their lives, there's all sorts of horrible, terrible, devastating things, losing everything in a flood, having a fire, losing all your children. I mean, this happens over and over and over again in their lives. And yet there is this spiritual resilience that they have, that they see their lives as part of this, a plan, a divine plan, that they are really part of a much bigger spiritual project, that they're, and see, this was just every diary. And I mean, it's in there. It can't be fake. Like, I just don't, it doesn't seem like this banal thing that they're just saying, yes, like they're going to spend a couple sentences talking about, God and about angels and about things like, I just don't. And see, I think the conceit of the day is to look at those observations and to say, this is just their superstitions and their ignorance. I just don't think in those conditions where you're dealing with the massive indifference of nature and its savagery, that would hold up. I just don't feel like just holding on to these ridiculous superstitions and then being these empty, hollow things would be of any use to anybody in these situations. It definitely wouldn't help you to rise up after you've lost all of your children, or that, your family's been massacred. I mean, there's things like this over and over again. But where I'm going with that is that is a bleakness that we can't comprehend, but there's a bleakness in our world. And this is the thing, is McCarthy kind of marries these two together, because his characters, they don't go on, you don't sense this deep religiosity in any of his characters. If it is, it seems contrived in some ways, or it's kind of empty, or it's like an accessory in some ways. What you see though is that bleakness of a world that has been, it's spiritually exhausted, and I can identify with that. I think most of us in the modern world can identify with that bleakness. And he brings this savagery, and he pulls in that existential, the conditions that I was talking about maybe with our ancestors. And yet there's this other bleakness that we can identify more with. Like, let's be honest, if you were to give a book by Cormac McCarthy to somebody who lived, in 1830s and, out on the frontier, let's say that they could read it and digest it. They wouldn't understand it. It would make no sense to them. It wouldn't, like, what I'm saying is it wouldn't be like something that would say, this really does speak to my experience. Like, this is like the world I'm living in. They wouldn't say that, right? It's for us at this time, because I think one of the elements that he works with is that other bleakness that only we understand. And so I feel like that is a really powerful thing within his writing. And it goes beyond just the frontier. You don't read Blood Meridian because it's like it's realistic, but this is not the same thing as, like, reading the original that, inspired elements of Blood Meridian. They're different things.
Glanton's Gang, right? It's not the real story of Glanton's Gang. It's the mythos of it. You told to the modern audience. Yeah, I mean, and who's more superstitious, right? The folks who, I don't think they're superstitious, but framing it this way, who's more superstitious? The folks whose kids died and they pray to the Lord that His will be done, or the people who think that men can be women if you just put them on a surgeon's table and slice a few bits off. Like, there's a deep, almost broken, thwarted spirituality and bleakness that we live in. That it would be unfathomable to folks 100 years ago.
I think that's key. Who is more superstitious? Let's take like a sick child who dies or something. Is it those of us who understand that there is something larger at play? Maybe you call it, maybe it's the Lord's will, and that you come to accept that, or somebody who has to hold on to the belief, throughout the ordeal that, that this imaginary, science, capital S science, will save this child, and when it doesn't, must, there's a reason why that there seems to be this real desperation that we all feel, because I think that we know beneath all of this, all these things, all these fictions, that they're not all bad, right? Like, we all maybe call it a myth. These things influence and, they inform our lives. We have to live according to a lot of fictions. But when we believe in them so intently, because we almost privately know that they are myths and they are fictions, that like science can solve everything, that science can solve spiritual problems, that they can answer questions. They can answer every question that is, bedeviled philosophers and theologians for centuries, right? Who is really more superstitious in that way? Like, who, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that that is where I think we have a lot to still learn. Like, I think we're starting. This is what's interesting to me is I think all of that last gasp of that world, I felt like passed us by in the early 2000s. You kind of see like the rise and fall of the new atheists, or just like a symptom of this. Nobody really returns back to that place and looks for guidance at all. What I'm finding is people are going way further back to a world that was informed by a spiritual realm that seems to have, that seems like walled over, like it's been walled up and it's been closed off. But people know there's something behind there and they feel a longing to probe that. And I think that is interesting to me. I think we're going to a place where a lot of this scaffolding that we've kind of constructed like our modern lives around, it's really weak and it's starting to fall apart. And so even as things get worse, we say, there's things that are going to be better. I feel like there's a spiritual realm out there that is slowly being unleashed in a good way. And so I like to see where we're going with that. And believe it or not, I do think that I don't know if I would say that Cormac McCarthy is like, I think his writing, I think one of the reasons why his writing is so popular is because it starts to go into that realm in a way. And I know that many people would disagree with me on that, but I really do think that it occupies a space that has been left vacant for a very long time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, big McCarthy fancy, and I still have to read the last books that he published before he passed. Did you read those? Did you get a chance to go through those?
Yeah, I haven't finished actually. I've been going through. I started them. I think right after I got them. I think I pre-ordered it, or my wife did, nice. And so I got a hold of them pretty early, and then I started reading through it. And one of my good friends on Twitter really enjoyed it. So he and I, I've been picking his brain a little bit because it was different. It was a lot different than his other writing.
That's what I've heard.
Can't say that I've enjoyed it as much as his other writing, but I want to enjoy it. I want to understand it better. I want it to I want to get what my good friend on Gruntpaw he goes by Gruntpaw, but I want to know what he sees in it, And so I'm going to try to finish, get back to finishing it. But nice. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to hear what other people think about that book. Or those two books, excuse me.
Yeah, the last two. Lee, we're coming to the end of our time, but speaking of sort of writing and products, what do you have cooking out, and where is your online and on publications? Where is your effort going these days?
So I've got two. I am writing some things for I Am 1776. We'll have a review of Oppenheimer that I've written, hopefully coming out pretty soon. I did see that film. I have many thoughts on it. I will say, I think it's a great film. So I know that I have certain qualms, and I'm sure people can, guess what they are. But for the most part, it's a great film, and I think that people should not sleep on that film, with or without some of these qualms that I have. And then I've been working on, I write a lot about communist infiltration, espionage activities in the United States. I think it's a really interesting chapter in our history. I've been writing some pieces on Substack that I want to put out and kind of explaining why I think that chapter in our history, this kind of ranging from the 1920s until about the end of the 1950s, why that period is so important, why the Soviet Union and Soviet infiltration of our institutions, why it's relevant. So I'm writing about that right now. And then finally, and I feel guilty about this, but I've had an Apocalypse Now series that I've been working on for about a year. Those are finally going to start coming out. I've had to revisit them like 3 or 4 times because it's just one of those films that it's probably one of the best films ever made. I want to do it justice, but there's very strong niche themes in there that I've explored over several years, and I really want to get those out. So sorry for the long thing, but I do have several projects in the works right now.
That's awesome.
You can find them at IM1776 or over at Substack.
Yeah, ruins.substack. It's a great name and easy to remember, and substack.com. Lee, last 2 questions we ask these of every guest. The black pill and the white pill question. The black pill is what is worse than most people realize? You could kind of in the realm and expert in the world that you live in.
No, absolutely. There is, I think the worst thing that anybody can experience is when you're lying on your deathbed and you realize that you have given your good years of your life away to impersonal forces that do not care about you. I think that is something that all of us who live in this modern day and age, in the age of the internet, that we need to remember is that when you start surveying the end of your life, you do not want to live with the regret of knowing that you gave up your time, your energy, and your will to impersonal forces that only exhausted you and that allowed life to pass you by. So that's a black pill, but we all have the opportunity now to change that. And I think we need to always do a reevaluation of our lives and priorities so that we don't experience that.
Yeah. So is that your white pill? What is better than most people realize these days?
I would say this is going to be a stupid one, but I really believe in this. I think what's better than most people realize is sunshine. I think everybody should go out and drink it in. I think that they should spend as much time as they can in the sun. Make it better. Spend it with people you love, especially your kids. If you have kids or you are, anybody who's under the age of 10, like small children in your home, spend time with them out in the sun. I think there's nothing better than that. It's rejuvenating. It's a special, sacred opportunity that we have. And being able to just be in the presence of fun, innocent children out in nature, in the sunshine, there's just nothing better than that. So if you're feeling, gloomy and you feel like life is not worth living or whatever, go out and get some sun. If you're a dad or a mom and you have children, go outside in the sun with your kids. And I think it will improve your attitude a little bit.
Touch grass, as the online kids say.
Yeah.
Absorb sun.
Yeah, that's my version.
Absorb sun. Yeah, absorb sun. Awesome. And I look forward to reading the Oppenheimer review. We are a bunch of us from the office this evening are going to see Oppenheimer. So be good to dig into that. So, hey, Lee, thank you so much, man, for coming on. Really enjoyed this conversation. It was an honor to have you on the pod and a pleasure to speak with you, man.
Yeah, thank you. I really do appreciate the time, and I hope you enjoy the film, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, you too.